because the hallmark of liberal democracy, what is central and critical for any functioning liberal democracy, is the ability to challenge ideas, so long as you're rational, fair, considered in your argument. It's paramount that we protect that right. Now, my work is a centrist reckoning with multiculturalism.
Now, the title of the book was,
is The Delusion of Multiculturalism.
Delusion of Multiculturalism. Now, okay, you say this is done from a centrist viewpoint. Can you explain to me, because I genuinely always been mystified, how would you describe a centrist? I mean, if you are a centrist, what would that mean?
Well, it means that I'm in favour of maintaining multicultural societies.
Right.
But multicultural societies cannot function unless diversity is reconciled with that which we all share. Now, in my book, I emphasise the importance of centrists reclaiming debates around nationhood, culture, and the place, or perhaps the imperative of having a national identity which goes beyond just merely owning a passport.
Yeah.
And the failure to define, much less assert, a national identity, I submit, has led to not only these vast divisions we see in our society, but has enabled the extremism that my book is really concerned about. And I argue that we need to be able to not only have a grasp of policy, because I think there are major shortcomings when it comes to counter-extremism policies,
right,
but this is a matter which goes beyond policy. Right. This is fundamentally about culture and our own identity and our own values. And unless we have a reckoning with those things, any effort we make on the policy front, I think, will have a very limited effect.
The thing is, I mean, I disagree with you about multiculturalism, for example. I think that it was always doomed to failure, actually, and there are various reasons for it. But I think one of the interesting things that you say or as I understand it, obviously because the book has not been seen, is that there is now this sort of strange alliance between Islamists and, if you like, the left.
Yeah.
And would it be right to say that's...
Oh, yeah, but it's you see, this is where you had the chutzpah to challenge me, so I might challenge you. I think that the explosion of Islamist anti-Semitism, for example, post-October 7th, just take that as a case in point. I think years ago, your assessment would have been accurate that it's actually encouraged and enabled by the far left. I think now it's enabled by my fellow centrists. I think that our liberal establishment, because of their own delusional thinking that you can cultivate a society in which we tolerate everyone and we have no boundaries to our tolerance. We have a boundless tolerance, if you will. And you think we can all live in peace and harmony. I think that delusion, hence the title, is responsible for this explosion of Islamist anti-Semitism. And of course, the issue of anti-Semitism, as ever, is about more than Jews. My late grandfather was a black taxi driver. Many Jews were black taxi drivers because they could be their own bosses. And when my grandfather, you say about the taxi trade that you could measure how well an economy was doing by how well the black cabbies were doing, right? I think today, and I think this is a fair assessment, you can measure how successful or how stable a liberal democracy is by the way its Jews are doing, right? And whenever you look at anti-Semitism, particularly the Islamist incarnation of anti-Semitism, it cannot be understood without recognizing its relationship to anti-democratic thinking, misogyny, homophobia, sexism. And this is why we have to be able as a society to remind ourselves that when Jews are in trouble, we're all in trouble.
I mean, when you talk about the Islamist anti-Semitism, been entirely on show over the past, since October 7th.
Yeah.
The thing is that the problem there is that you term it Islamist, but there have been polls that have shown that the one, which I spoke about myself on GB News, which have shown the level of anti-Semitism broadly in the Muslim community is far, far greater than in the mainstream. And to the point of something like 3/4 of them actually didn't think that Hamas had actually carried out those attacks. That's extraordinary, isn't it, Harry?
So this you've just highlighted a critical point. We need to stop seeing the issue of Islamism as a pariah issue. Chapter 2 of my work looks at precisely what you've just identified. Yeah. And I think the term we need to be using now is Islamism beyond Islamists.
Right.
The idea that we have seen the normalization of Islamist thinking in swathes of our Muslim communities. And this is why Mehdi Hassan spoke about this issue as being, for the Muslim communities, this being our dirty little secret, that of anti-Semitism. The problem is it's the way of thinking now is extreme in its very nature. And so this is why we need to stop comparing Islamism to that of the far right, because the far right, I mean, when I mean the far, I mean the genuine far right, not just people we disagree with, but the issue of the extreme right, because the Islamist stuff is much more, well, I think it's far more influential and it has far more subscribers in terms of, or adherence to its thinking. Whereas the far right ideology, I mean, for sure it's there, but it's really not a threat. And if I as a Jew had to write the top 10 concerns that the Jewish community have, that wouldn't go in that list. It's just not there. And I think it's when we speak of the far right and Islamism together, it's kind of a useful technique for liberals to kind of show how they're both extremes and that they're both pariah things in our societies. They're not.
Yes, yeah.
Right? One is a real major issue.
Yes, yes.
And in terms of the way in which it makes ordinary members of our Muslim community cleave to extremist ideas around Jews, about democracy and other things. I mean, there's a lot of data out there. In my book, I reveal some of these alarming polls. And we need to recognize this as not a pariah issue, but now an issue that's becoming increasingly mainstream.